Back, everyone, to the Thought Experiment, a debate series brought to you by the Skeptic Haven. I hope you are all doing well, and thank you all so much for joining us. Let's get started.
Where ideas enter the ring.
Hello, everyone. Tonight, the subject on the table is the resurrection of Jesus, and it will be debated by Christian apologist, author, and Baptist pastor Dr. Greg Rogers, who will be taking the affirmative position, and in the other side, positive atheism and secular humanism advocate Bryce Cornell, who hosts the YouTube channel Brycearonee, will be taking the negative position. I am JL from the channel Bridge the Divide, and I will be moderating tonight's discussion. The format for tonight's debate will consist of 7-minute openings from each, followed by 15 minutes of cross-examination, followed by 30-minute open discussion, and 5 minutes for closing statements. Afterwards, we will open the discussion to you, the audience, for Q&A. So be sure to tag your burning questions for the interlocutors with @SkepticHaven. That makes sure that we can see them. So we are ready to go. Interlocutors, are you ready? Start your engines.
Start your engines.
Beep, beep, beep. Let's do it. And we're going to start with the affirmative position as soon as the squares, because we're playing with the squares here, I see. Because I only see myself here at the moment. There we go.
Okay.
There he is. I think they're going to put me down at the bottom.
If I can't say just real quickly.
Position.
Yeah, if I can just say real quickly, just as a point of information, I am not a pastor. I'm not a doctor. I happen to go to a Baptist church. So anyway, I just want to make sure that's known out there. So I'll start. Good evening, everyone.
The clock will start. The clock will start on your first word.
Okay, my first words now. Okay, good evening, everyone. Before we begin, I want to clarify something important about the difference between what I know and what I believe. There are very few things in ancient history that any of us can claim to know with absolute certainty. Most historical conclusions are not built on direct observation, but on evidence, testimony, corroboration, consistency, and determining what explanation best accounts for the facts we possess. I believe Julius Caesar crossed the Rubicon. I believe Socrates existed. I believe Alexander the Great conquered much of the known world. Yet I do not possess video footage or firsthand experience of any of those events. My belief is based on historical reasoning. So tonight, I'm not arguing that the resurrection of Jesus Christ can be reproduced in a laboratory or proven in a way that one proves a mathematical equation. I'm arguing that when we examine the historical evidence honestly and consistently, I believe the resurrection best explains the facts we have before us. And I think that distinction matters because often discussions like this become framed as though Christians are operating from blind faith while skeptics are operating from pure objectivity. But the reality is that all of us interpret historical evidence through conclusions we believe best explain reality. The real question tonight is not whether absolute certainty exists. The question is this: what explanation best accounts for the historical evidence surrounding the life, death, and reported resurrection of Jesus of Nazareth? Now, even among non-Christian historians, there are several facts surrounding Jesus that are widely acknowledged. Most, I know there's some arguments about this, but most would say that Jesus of Nazareth was a historical figure that was crucified under Pontius Pilate. Second, shortly after his death, his followers sincerely and publicly proclaimed that he had risen from the dead and appeared to them. Third, this message spread explosively in the very city where Jesus had been executed, despite opposition from both religious and political authorities who had every motivation to stop it. Fourth, the earliest accounts include details that are deeply counterproductive if the story were invented. For example, women are presented as the first witnesses to the empty tomb. In that culture and historical setting, women were not viewed as reliable legal witnesses. If the goal were fabrication, that is an extraordinarily strange detail to include. And fifth, even opponents of Christianity did not simply point to a body and end the movement. Instead, alternative explanations emerged attempting to explain why the tomb was empty in the first place. Now, none of these points by themselves automatically prove the resurrection. I fully acknowledge that. But history is often not about a single isolated fact. It is about cumulative explanatory power. And that is where I believe the resurrection stands apart. Because when you attempt to combine all of these realities together, the alternatives begin struggling under the weight of evidence. Did the disciples lie? Then we must explain why so many were willing to suffer and die for something they knew was false. Was it a legend? Then we must explain how such a movement exploded so rapidly while eyewitnesses and hostile authorities were still alive. Was it a hallucination? Well, hallucinations do not account for empty tombs, group experiences, or the enduring conviction that transformed fearful followers into bold proclaimers. Again, my point tonight is not that every question can be answered with absolute certainty. My point is that the resurrection is not something I believe because I abandon reason. It is something I believe because I follow the evidence where I believe it leads. And ultimately, I believe the rise of Christianity, the testimony of the earliest witnesses, the transformation of the disciples, the empty tomb tradition, the inability of competing theories to adequately explain the totality of the evidence point to a conclusion that changed human history, that Jesus Christ truly rose from the dead. Thank you.
All right. Thank you for that opening. Bryce, you have 7 minutes for your opening. The clock starts on your first word.
All right. Well, hello. My name is Bryce, or Brycearonee. I'm an atheist who deconstructed out of Christianity. I'm here to argue against the claim that Jesus resurrected from the dead and why I think Christianity is dependent on the irrational belief that he did. And I'm going to do that by pointing out three specific problems I have with the resurrection accounts. The first problem is it doesn't come from a reliable source. It's based on secondhand stories, hearsay, recorded many decades after the fact. Most Christians begin with this premise that the gospel accounts were written by eyewitnesses. However, this is simply not the case. When your argument is dependent on premises that are either unsupported or false, then it necessarily leads to a faulty conclusion, or what we call an unsound argument. Believing that any of the disciples wrote about Jesus is in itself an act of faith, because that's not supported by the data. Luke was presumed to be written by an associate of Paul. Mark was presumed to be written by John Mark, an associate of Peter. So neither of these gospels even claim to be written by disciples, nor do the authors claim to be eyewitnesses. Matthew's authorship is completely unknown. Only church tradition assigns that name to the anonymous writing, linking it to the name of the disciple. But that name is never identified in the book. And Matthew steals material from Mark, including Matthew's own conversion story. Think about that. An eyewitness would not copy stories from a non-eyewitness about his own life 50 to 60 years after the events. That's kind of ridiculous. John is even worse because it's written nearly 70 years after the death of Christ, so several generations have gone by now. It introduces all kinds of new mythology around Christ and contradicts the other gospels, specifically regarding the resurrection. It also doesn't claim to be written by John. John 21:4 says it's multiple people taking testimony from John. 1 Peter, which predates all of the Gospels, is really the only writing claimed in the writing to have been written by a disciple. Yet even that is highly disputed in academic scholarship. Bottom line, we have no writings from Jesus or his disciples that are contemporary to the time of events they describe. The second point I want to bring up is this idea. Oh, wait, hang on. I lost my script here. There we go. The second idea I want to bring up is this idea that the Gospels contradict themselves. The stories revolving around Jesus' birth, his trial, his execution, and his alleged resurrection, they're inconsistent with each other. As a former Christian apologist, I used to try to defend this by suggesting that these accounts were taken by witnesses who had different perspectives. The minor details could be off, but the gist of the story, the important parts, were all consistent. But during my deconstruction, I realized that this argument doesn't really work because these are not minor inconsistencies. They're major contradictions to the point where some of the stories must be false. They can't all be true as written, although they can all be false. But if parts of the Gospels can be false, then what reason would I have for placing faith that any of the claims, especially the extraordinary ones, are true? Matthew and Luke disagree with each other on when Jesus was born. Matthew says he was born during the reign of King Herod, who died in 4 BCE. Luke says he was born during the census of Quirinius, which started in 60 CE. So that's a 10-year gap. These two books don't even agree on Jesus' genealogy. Joseph's father is called Jacob in Matthew, but Luke says his father is Heli. So that's a disagreement. The book of John disagrees with the synoptic gospels about when Jesus was crucified. John says it was on or about the 6th hour, which is noon. The synoptic gospels say he was crucified on the 3rd hour, which is 9 a.m. So if he was crucified at 9 a.m., how could he still be on trial at noon, which is what John says? That they can't both be true. One of them is lying. When the women visited the tomb, John says Mary Magdalene told the disciples, and the disciples ran to the tomb. Luke says they told the other disciples, but they weren't believed. And Mark says they told no one. Well, all of these can't be true. That's a major contradiction. Either the woman told the disciples what they saw, or they didn't. Either they were believed or they weren't. The resurrection of Christ is the single most important story in the entire Bible, and it would be the most important event in human history if it were true. In 1 Corinthians 15, Paul states that if Christ has not been risen, our preaching is useless and so is our faith, which means that the believing in the resurrection of Jesus is the cornerstone of Christianity. But if this is so important to humanity, why then would the only accounts we have of this event come from unreliable stories that have glaring contradictions in them? This is an extraordinary claim which demands extraordinary evidence. Instead, what we get are suspicious, contradictory accounts that cannot be logically reconciled to each other. And finally, the third problem is the extraordinary nature of the claim itself. I will assume that for the purposes of this discussion, we will all agree that resurrections are biologically impossible. They don't happen. This means that we have to appeal to the supernatural to justify belief in the resurrection. This presents two issues. Number one, the circularity of the argument. I don't believe in the supernatural, so I have no reason to believe in a resurrection. The supernatural is not something that can be demonstrated. And one of the evidences that Christians point to for the supernatural is the resurrection of Christ. But that's the thing that you're trying to prove. You can't prove the supernatural is possible by pointing to a resurrection and then prove that resurrections are possible by pointing to the supernatural. That's complete fallacious circular reasoning. The other issue I have with the nature of the claim is how common resurrection accounts were in the ancient world. People of many nations and many religions believed in resurrections at this time. The Greeks believed that Adonis resurrected. The Egyptians believed that Osiris resurrected. The Romans believed that Romulus, the founder of Rome, resurrected, and also that Nero resurrected. The point is, while a resurrection of anyone would be extraordinary, resurrection accounts are not extraordinary. In fact, in the ancient world, they were quite common. Jesus's resurrection account, which only comes from the Bible, is just another in a long line of them from different belief systems in different cultures. If you're not willing to believe that Romulus and Nero resurrected from the dead, why would you believe that Jesus did? That concludes my opening.
Thank you, Bryce.
Sorry.
All right. We're now moving into the cross-examination section. Greg, you have 15 minutes, and the clock starts on your first word.
I guess the first one I probably would deal with is the extraordinary claims would require extraordinary evidence. I guess the question I would ask would be, what kind of evidence would you be looking for to have as far as there being, in a historical sense, extraordinary evidence of something happening? In the case of what we see here, we have people that say they've seen him. Again, this is from the Bible, and I know you may question that as a source, but the people that were writing at that time weren't writing for a court case. They were writing, or what was being written was about what they were testifying to at that time. And so you would look to see what was the result, what did people do with what evidence they were seeing at the time, and to see how they reacted to what was the claim. And what you saw was an explosion of Christian belief in the area at the time, even as I said, in the midst of a lot of groups that were against it. I don't know how this particular section works, if this means we go back and forth on that point, or does it mean that I just answer the 3 points that you raised? JL, can you give us some guidance on that for a second?
Yeah, I mean, I can answer the question you just asked. I don't know. He can direct us to where we should go after that.
Okay.
It's the responses to whatever Greg is asking you regarding
Okay.
the points
We just
that
go
you
back and
made.
forth. So
okay.
what would it take for there to be extraordinary evidence?
Yeah. Well, so the first part of that is it depends on the nature of the claim, right? So there's a lot of different kinds of claims. Some of them are theological, some of them relate to like your eternal salvation, which is what the Jesus claim would be, possibly the Muhammad one as well. And then you have other extraordinary claims that wouldn't be quite as important, although they would change human history. So I'll put it like this. There's a lot of UFO accounts. That's actually been in the news not too long ago. Do I believe in UFOs? If UFOs mean unidentified flying objects, then yes, of course there's UFOs. Do I believe that these UFOs are indicative of aliens invading the Earth? No. I don't think that the appearance of unidentified flying objects supports the conclusion that therefore aliens are on the Earth. That's the extraordinary claim for me. In order for me to believe that aliens were on the Earth, I would probably have to, one, it would help if I could see an alien, like if we could actually, examine, even if we could examine the ship, the problem with all of these UFO accounts is that it's all blurry images, bad video, poor photography. It's the same with cryptids. People have believed in Bigfoot forever. We never see any pictures of Bigfoot. We never see any video of Bigfoot. Is it possible? It's not logically impossible. There could be creatures out there that we don't know about, but and so arguably that's not even really an extraordinary claim. But the fact is, I don't believe in that claim because no one can ever show me a Bigfoot. There's no documented confirmed cases of it. And so when it comes to those kind of claims, I usually just dismiss them as non-reliable, non-credible. If I could actually see one, though, that might be different. When it comes to these theological claims, they take place back in the day where there was no technology that could have preserved data. So they're already at a disadvantage. But when it comes to like theological claims in general, like Christianity, Jesus, seeing Jesus, if I had a vision of Jesus, that might convince me that Jesus was real, but I can't go back in time and see him being crucified. I can't go back in time and see the tomb. And so I don't know what I'm supposed to do with that. I don't know how you can validate that type of claim, especially the claim about a resurrection. Resurrections don't seem to happen today. Even,
right.
Whether they're religious based or medical, they just don't seem to ever happen. And so I don't know that I have a good reason to think that a resurrection ever happened. But if I saw one, that might convince me. That would be an extraordinary thing to see that might fit.
So would that not take us back and say, okay, since we weren't there and we could not see the resurrection take place, because again, we're talking about something historical in the past. It's not like Bigfoot and I can walk out in the forest and go and try to see something there. Mm-hmm. I agree with you. I would want to see it as well before I would believe it. I get that. I understand. But given that the resurrection was something that happened 2,000 years ago, what we're left with is, okay, is there someone that we can look to and say, okay, what was the reaction of the people who were there in that time? And not only from what the Bible says, but what we hear about from the religious writings or writings of the Jewish of history. There was an explosion of people who came to faith in Jesus Christ at that time, in the early times following the resurrection or the claims of the resurrection. And given that was the reaction, especially given that it was in the face of their religious leaders and authorities and political leaders saying that they wanted to squelch this as being a claim, that they would have so many people that were coming daily to faith in Christ and willing to put their lives on the line in the midst of that. To me, that speaks to something extraordinary. Again, it's not foolproof because all of us, and again, I'm not trying to say this is absolute certainty, that there's not a step of faith and belief that's here for us, because we don't have that, but I can look and see how they reacted. And the reaction was one of seemingly that would be what you would be looking for if people were seeing him actually risen from the dead. If I can go to your other 2 points real quickly before we move on, you'd mentioned something about the Gospels not being written necessarily by the people that actually were the writers. I mean, at that time, a lot of historical writings were being written by others, and so we don't necessarily look at that and say, okay, wait a minute, that counters the information that they're saying. It just means that someone may have written it, and it could have been someone who was a subordinate or someone else who was had been with that person and heard those stories. I don't think that necessarily takes us away from the information as being true. In fact, if you were to go back and look in Paul's writings in 1 Corinthians in chapter 15, you have an example of an early church creed that if you were to time this out based on what was written around that letter, it would actually place it as being a creed that was probably something that they were saying within 7 years or so of the actual events of the resurrection. So if that creed was something they were actually already saying within 7 years, certainly that would be within the time period where people could be able to question whether or not this creed was, it would be one of the things they could highly question. And you don't see that hindering or being called into question a lot. What you see is people in masses turning to Christ. So I understand what you're saying about that. And then with regards to the contradictions that may be there, in fact, if this was a fabricated story, you would probably be looking to see whether all of these people had the same story. If they all had the same story, that usually, when you look at it from a criminal standpoint and looking at eyewitness accounts, usually when you have stories that are all the same, that's when you start to raise a red flag as to whether or not the stories are actually fabricated. It actually, for most people, would be something that you would look at and say, this gives actually genuine credence to this. Yes, that they didn't have the same story but yet in totality were pretty close to each other, means that they probably didn't remember everything the same, and they didn't try to get their stories right together. They just said it as they remembered it. And so that, from a criminology standpoint, when you're talking about eyewitness accounts, that actually is viewed as being something that gives legitimacy, not as something that takes away from the legitimacy of eyewitness accounts. So I think for those on those 3 points, I would say it doesn't prove, but I think it may not be as strong a case as what you might think it is.
Okay. Should I respond to that, or
yeah,
it's just, I don't know if his time is up. I don't want to take away from.
No, he still has a few minutes. So
okay. That's it. That's all I have. Yeah, go ahead and yeah.
Okay. I'll try to tackle those in the reverse order.
Okay.
The last thing you said was about the credibility of eyewitness testimony, that when there's discrepancies, that lends more credibility from the standpoint of a criminal investigation. I can't speak to criminology.
I'm talking about in historical. Let me clarify that. In looking at historical documentation and looking at eyewitnesses' accounts, that's normally what they would say.
Yeah, I mean, I can only speak to what is true from a legalistic perspective. In a court of law, I know that when you have a bunch of eyewitnesses, even two, that contradict each other, that makes them both less credible. I think eyewitness testimony in a courtroom is the weakest form of evidence. And it's only usually when there's a multitude of eyewitnesses that all agree that something happened does the jury kind of buy it. When they start getting discrepancies, they start thinking, well, wait a minute, it's like he said, she said at that point. Who are you going to believe? You know, with respect to the Gospels not being written by the disciples, I think the point being made there is more of the fact that they all claim. Well, let me walk that back. Most Christians that I debate with, or that are trying to proselytize, have this idea that this story, the resurrection account, and pretty much everything that Jesus did was witnessed by eyewitnesses. And oftentimes they'll point to the Gospels most Christians, I don't know if it's most, I don't know what the percentage is. I'm not going to make that up. But a lot of Christians that I talk to seem to think that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John were eyewitnesses. They weren't. They talk about eyewitnesses, but we don't have any actual eyewitness accounts. We just have 4 anonymous people claiming that there were eyewitnesses to something. Mm-hmm. Well, that's not eyewitness testimony. And so, if part of the defense to Jesus resurrected from the dead because there were so many eyewitnesses, nobody can point me to an eyewitness. I can't even examine the writings of a single eyewitness. So I don't know that there were any eyewitnesses. So that doesn't work to me as a convincing argument that anyone resurrected from the dead. We don't even have eyewitnesses. By the way, even if we did have eyewitnesses, I would still be skeptical, right? Because eyewitnesses, they can hallucinate, they can misremember, they can think they're seeing something that they're not. Were any of these people medical experts? Did any of them examine the body? Was he really dead? I don't know. So even if there were eyewitnesses, I would still have cause for skepticism, but we don't even have eyewitnesses. So that's kind of why I brought up the fact that the gospel authors, we don't know who wrote them. And then I'm trying to think, the thing you said before that, what was your first point?
Where are you going back all the way?
I'm going backwards. I'm sorry.
Are you going back to extraordinary claims and extraordinary evidence?
I think you said something right after that. Because I mostly addressed that one. I mean, I could expand on that one. I think that when it comes to claims that were made back in the day, I remember what it is. You were talking about how a lot of the, so many people came to believe in this. Why would they all come to believe in this if it wasn't true? I think that people are quick to believe in things that they want to be true, especially in the absence of contradicting evidence. And I think we see that in every religion. Even today, we see that. We have technology today, we have science, we have all this stuff, and people will give religious testimony that contradicts all that, and people will still believe it. I assume you don't believe in the claims of Islam or Hinduism, but they're believed by billions of people, So billions of people can come to believe in untrue things. People even die. You talked about the disciples or the apostles, I think you said, were willing to die for their beliefs, but that happens in other religions too. I mean, we have Muslim jihadists who are willing to die for their beliefs, which I'm sure you would say are not true. They're dying for a lie. Even if they believe it to be true, your belief system doesn't allow for it to be true, so it's necessarily a lie, But that happens. People, the apostles, if we assume that they were all martyred, which is also an assumption that I have no evidence of, because we only have, I think the Bible only mentions 2. 37. But even if we assume that, people die for things that are not true all the time. Sometimes they believe it. David Koresh is another example. That's probably the biggest example in recent history. He thought he was the second coming of Christ. He died, and a bunch of people died for him. You're from Waco, Texas, are you not?
No, but I went to Baylor. So
okay, so you know that whole story.
In fact, I was there when David Koresh was going on.
Fair enough. So I say no more.
All right, that puts us right at the 15-minute mark. Thank you so much, Greg, for that cross-examination. This goes on to you, Bryce. You have 15 minutes for your cross-examination section. And let me just restart this. Time will start on your first word.
Okay, I didn't write anything specific for this. I was just mostly going to react to what you said. But part of the thing that you used for what convinces you that Jesus resurrected is the fact that, so many people were so willing to believe it. So I guess piggybacking on the last point that I just made about how all of these other religions have similar stories. By the way, those are just the religions we know of now. Even predating Christianity, the same thing existed. I mean, the Greek mythology, Egyptian, Roman history, they all have their entire society believing in these extraordinary things. So how do you explain, or what would you say is the best explanation for why all of these other people and all of these other religions believe in the thing that they do, despite those things not being true according to your worldview?
So let me see. So you're asking me basically why, if they all have extraordinary claims, why would I not believe that they're right?
Well, no, the question is more so, why is it that so many, for example, Islam is the second largest religion, right? There's billions of Muslims in the world. Why do you think that so many Muslims easily believe that the Prophet Muhammad was sent by God and that he's the last prophet and that Allah is the true God? If that's not true, how can so many of these people believe it? And how can some of them even be willing to die for it if it's not true? What's your best explanation for that?
Well, I mean, it depends on if you're talking about today versus if you're talking about then.
We can do both.
Originally happened. When they originally happened, my understanding is there was a reaction to Islam came out following Christianity, and so it was a reaction to Christianity, and so it gave a group of people that were at odds with Christians a rallying point for themselves as a people group. So I think that would largely be an expression of why it would have happened originally. I mean, if you look at where Islam springs from, it springs from basically the testimony of one individual, as opposed to multiple individuals across centuries. When you think about things from a Bible standpoint, if you're talking about the testimony, again, just bringing it back to the point of the resurrection, if we're talking about the resurrection, you look at the writings of Paul, there's the bringing up of that there were 2 eyewitnesses, there were 15 other witnesses, there were as many as 400 witnesses at a time. And I know we don't have their eyewitness accounts. It's not, and I tell this to Christians all the time, be careful when you bring that up, because it's not like you can go and say, hey, here's one of the 400 people that I can point out what their eyewitness testimony was. But yet we have that historically in a lot of different groups from the standpoint of we can't look at a lot of different groups' testimonies. What we can do is see what was the reaction of the people during that time. Christianity exploded. Islam did not explode. It has grown over time, slowly over time, and it's exploded more recently, but its earliest underpinnings was not an explosion.
Well, I don't know what you mean by explosion. When you say Christianity exploded,
thousands in days, thousands on a daily basis, not just expressed in terms of documentation from Christian writings, but also of Jewish writings as well. So, and we don't have that corroborating evidence, and maybe that's a point where you can't say specifically, just because we don't have the written documentation of it. We don't have any written documentation that says anything like that of an explosion with Islam.
Well, I don't know that we have that with Christianity either. We have the testimony of Paul, like you did mention, that he mentions that there's, multitudes of eyewitnesses. But as far as I know, Paul is the one making that claim. By the way, all of Paul's writings predate the Gospels. You know that, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So as far I don't know that,
and all of them though within a lesser period of time than would have accounted for myth or legend to arise in terms of the studies of how myths and legends arise. If these are all within, I think the latest writings that we have are within 70 years, and even that's within a single generation in most cases. Usually myths arise over periods of 3 generations.
Well, I would say that it depends.
You would have that generation. You would have the children, you'd have the up through the grandparents that could always say no. And
well, it depends. Yeah. It depends. And let me be clear: I'm not a Jesus mythicist. I'm not, or at least for the purposes of this conversation, I'm not. I actually don't know where I stand on Jesus mythicism, but for this conversation, I've accepted the historicity of Jesus. Because most of my life as a Christian I did, and even half of my life I would say as an atheist I did, and I waffle. I go back and forth on it, but right now I lean more towards Jesus existed as a historical person.
Can I ask this question?
Sure.
Do you believe that he was someone who was crucified?
Yes.
Historically? Do you believe?
I believe that he was executed. Whether that was the method of execution, I don't know.
Do you believe that he was buried after the fact, and that there was an empty tomb at some point?
Well, it's interesting that you talk about that, because that was going to be one of my points in the future. But what I wanted to bring up before we get to that is I am okay with the idea that there was a Jesus. I don't think that him existing is necessarily mythical. The mythical elements come later, when he's venerated as a god, when he's believed to have come back from the dead. And these are things that don't take multiple generations. Even in the time of Jesus, there were other people who were presumed to have been resurrected. You know, I already mentioned Nero. Nero and Jesus, they are contemporaries in the timeline. You know, they existed around the same time, and they both died, and they were both presumed to have been resurrected. There is a legend of Nero. So it doesn't take hundreds of years for people to get there. It only takes a person actually existing, the person dying, and then people who believed in that person, you know, or had a vision of that person to spread the word around. That's kind of how legend gets going. You know, there's not a lot of science and verification going on back then. You have a lot of people who are just desperate to believe in, you know, that people believe in stuff easily. The further back in time you go, the easier it is to convince a bunch of people. And so I don't think that that's extraordinary that Jesus became mythicized within 70 years. In fact, that would be the expectation I have based on what the theology was.
Did Nero become mythicized?
He did. There's a...
do we hear about it very much now?
Well, we don't, because guess what? Christianity took over the Roman Empire. And so, you know, those two beliefs together, they kind of contradict, and you can only have one.
So why would Nero's not be the one that would take over as opposed to Jesus? Surely there would be more support for Nero within the powers to be.
Well, because it was
the point.
Yeah, but a lot of the claims about Nero and what he would do when he came back failed. So it was discovered pretty quickly, okay, we don't have a good reason to believe in Nero. Like, one of the things that Nero was supposed to do was come back to defeat Christianity. Well, Christianity didn't do that. Constantine actually made Christianity the state religion, you know? And so once you get to that point where it's the state religion, Christianity wins, and all mentions of resurrections of other people, that's not biblical, and that can, you know, that's blasphemy at that point. But I guess what I'm trying to say is, when it comes to mythicizing, yeah, I think I said that right, mythicizing an individual who actually exists, it's not that hard. There's just multiple examples of it happening. So I don't think that the fact that a myth came up about Jesus being supernatural or resurrecting 70 years after, I don't think that's a defeater to.
But that was a part of the creeds that were of the early believers as early as within 10 years. I mean, again, the one that's written by Paul in 1 Corinthians 15 is within 7 years and maybe even closer. And that's at a time when it's probably doesn't have its legs. It has no backing by any power base. In fact, the power base would be against it.
Do you think Paul is a reliable source of information?
I believe so. Okay. As far as from a standpoint of
Paul gives an account.
He's giving an account of what the early church was believing at the time.
Paul gives multiple accounts, including an account that he witnessed Jesus himself during a Damascus Road experience. When no one else was around, it was just him, and so we just have his word to tell this story, right? And this
actually it wasn't just him. He happened to be the one who saw and heard. The others, it actually is attested to that others heard the noise and saw the light, or they saw evidence of something happening, but they didn't necessarily see Christ. But they did see something happen. So there were others that were there.
Did they? Who were they?
Where
do we get the story that there were others who were there?
One is from the book of Acts. So that was written by Luke, and the other was written by Paul. Yes.
Yeah. And who was Luke?
Luke was one of the disciples, Not one of the disciples. He was one of the he was a disciple, not one of the 12 disciples, though.
He was a follower. He was a companion of Paul.
Follower of Christ. Yes.
Luke got a lot of his information from Paul, right?
Paul got it from John. Mark got it from Peter.
No, I'm talking Luke. Luke was a traveling companion of Paul.
He was a traveling companion, and John Mark was with him as well.
Okay.
On some of those. So yeah, I hear what you're saying. I guess where
I'm going with it is Paul's story to me, and this is my time is running up, so I'm just gonna make it story.
Okay, go ahead. Yeah, I want to know that.
Paul's story to me sounds very similar to many other, shall I say, charlatans or false religious prophets who've come along to claim that they saw something when no one else could see it. Moses did this before. Muhammad did it after. Joseph Smith did it. David Korah, all of these people, they're usually having a solo experience and then they tell others and then they're believed. So I don't know that Paul is a reliable source of information. I also think that a lot of what Paul taught contradicted what Jesus taught, but we don't have time to get into that right now. Maybe we'll pick that up on the flip side. I think that's my time, isn't it?
Is that the time?
No, you still have 3.5. You still have 2.5 minutes.
Oh, okay. Well, it's still my turn, right?
Yeah, it's your turn. This is your line of questioning for the things that he said and him answering your questions till we get to the open.
Yeah, I think that Paul contradicted Jesus. I think he contradicted him on serious points of theology, like whether or not you have to follow the commandments, who gets saved, how salvation happens. Paul says that salvation is is an act of grace by faith alone, not by works, right? Is that what Jesus says, though?
Say that again. I'm sorry.
Paul says that salvation is an act of faith. It's not by works, so that no man can boast, right?
That's correct.
And he says that anyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved, right?
Right. That's correct.
But that's not what Jesus said. Jesus says in the book of Matthew, not everyone who calls Lord, Lord will enter into the kingdom of heaven. Only the one who does the will of the Father will enter. So to me, that sounds like a direct contradiction. Paul says that Jesus abolished the commandments. Jesus said, do not think that I've come to abolish the commandments. I've come to fulfill. And then he goes on to say, until heaven and earth pass away, not one jot nor tittle will be removed from the law until everything is accomplished. And he says, whoever follows the law and teaches others to follow the law will be called greatest in the kingdom of heaven. And whoever teaches those to not follow the law will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. So to me, it sounds like Jesus is pointing to Paul and calling him least in the kingdom of heaven.
Right. I guess all I would say is I think those are off topic from the standpoint of the resurrection per se.
You're not wrong. Yeah, I should be clear. The reason I asked is because I think Paul is a liar. I think he's coming along and making up his own theology that is inconsistent with what Jesus, if we believe the Gospels and what Jesus wrote, what Paul teaches is inconsistent with that.
30 seconds.
And so I have no reason to believe that he's a reliable source of information for anything. And most of what Christians point to as evidence for the resurrection is stuff that is pushed by Paul, possibly inspired by Paul. So that's why I don't believe Paul. That's all I was saying. And
I got you. And I think that's a point for another discussion probably, because I think on your point of, of saying that not everyone who says to me, calls me Lord, Lord will enter the kingdom of heaven. That is not the same thing that is being claimed by Christ, on the other side.
Right.
Saying if you believe. Yeah.
That's 15 minutes. And thank you both for your cross-examinations. How are we feeling so far?
I feel this is pretty pleasant. This is a very pleasant interaction. I've seen some debates turn into dumpster fires, and this doesn't appear to be that, so I'm happy about that.
All right. Well, the next 30 minutes here are now for the open discussion between the two of you. So however you want it to go, you've got 30 minutes. The timer will start on the first word whenever you guys are ready.
And I will just ask Greg simply. You may have said it already, but I would just like to ask a simple question and get the simplest explanation possible. Why do you believe that Jesus resurrected from the dead? Is it because so many people believed it at the time?
I think it's if it was just one thing, it was just that everyone believed it at the time. I don't think that would be enough evidence. Like I've said from the beginning, I think it's the culmination of all the different aspects that are coming together. And it's not something where we're going to step away from it saying, oh, wait a minute, that proves it absolutely. We're not dealing in absolutes here, absolute certainties. There will be a step of faith, just like there's a step of faith in whether or not you believe that Julius Caesar crossed the Rubicon. There's not a whole lot of that we have historically written about that, or evidences, or anything along the lines of eyewitness testimonies that are provided. But I think when you look at the culmination of what we do have, it's rational to believe that he did. And I think when you look at the preponderance of the evidence, in light of what would be the other things that you would look at and say, here's what could be happening, I think that it points to certainly that the resurrection would be a rational thing that you could believe. Yes, is it extraordinary? Absolutely. If you're talking about something that's a miracle, yeah, it's going to be extraordinary. But that when you add in the way it was accounted for as a story, and I'll point to using the types of testimony that they did, where the first people that are mentioned as the ones that actually discover this as being an event that took place were the women. In that society, that would not be the way that you would present an argument, and yet that's the way they present their argument. The fact that you have it being presented as an art, as an event during a time when the powers to be would want to squelch this, and yet not only are they unable to squelch it, but it explodes, not just by the Christian writings of the time, but the Jewish writings of the time as well. That there was an explosion of the Christian faith that took place in Jerusalem at that time. The fact that, again, you've got people, and I know what you're saying in terms, I understand what you're saying about martyrs and people, from other faiths that may die for things. But the fact that the people that you had here were willing to die for it, at least it either puts it in the boat where they were either crazy or and you've heard it, liars, lunatics, or they were telling the truth. It's one of those three things. And I'm not there to be able to account for them. I can't, you know me, I come from a neuroscience background. If I could, I would love to ask those people questions and be able to determine that. But I have those three options, and the fact that it explodes as it does in the face of a persecution about that, and using the kind of testimony they did, where it wouldn't be the way that you would normally try to set it up and fabricate it if you were, leads me to a place to at least say it's a plausible explanation. And if you're dealing with a reality of the living God. And so probably most of it comes down to whether or not you really believe that God's real or not.
I have a couple of things to say about that. One of them is if the question is liars, lunatics, or a guy raising from the dead, to me, the first two are more plausible than the third one. We know liars exist. We know lunatics exist. I don't know that anyone has ever rose from the dead before. So if I'm presented with those three options, that's probably gonna be the one I go to the last. I'm probably gonna look at liars first, and then I'm probably gonna look at lunatics first. Never what's the saying? Never attribute to dishonesty what can be better explained by ignorance, right? And so lunatics, then liars, then somebody raising from the dead. That's the first thing. You mentioned the criterion of embarrassment, which you didn't mention it by name, but that's kind of what your argument is when you're talking about like the women were the first ones to go in that culture. They wouldn't have done that if they were trying, or that the
disciples were hiding and weren't like stepping forward as heroes.
Yeah. So that's the criteria. That's that falls within the criterion of embarrassment. I don't agree with that. I think that that is not true, actually. I think that two things. Number one, women would have been the first to go to the tomb because it was women's responsibility to anoint the bodies. Men didn't do that. And so if you're trying to make the story more credible, you would have had the Marys, or at least some women, be the first ones at the tomb because that was actually normal. The other thing is, even if that weren't the case, even if it was true that women giving the testimony wouldn't have been seen as credible, there's something that outranks the criterion of embarrassment, and that's called plausibility. The story becomes more plausible because women were believed. So if the goal is to get people to believe it because, you know, it was women who you would do, an author might do that on purpose because he wanted people to believe it. So I kind of reject the criterion of embarrassment. I don't think that that's a good reason to think that the story is credible. I think that, number one, women did anoint the bodies. That was normal in that culture. And two, the gospels contradict each other about whether they were believed. One gospel says they were believed, one says that they weren't, and another one says that they didn't tell anyone. So which one do I believe? Which one should I believe? Why ought I believe one version over the other? That's to me, that's the main problem with this. I don't know why I should believe this story when it has that type of glaring contradiction, you know?
I would go back to if you had everyone saying exactly the same thing, and at least from a criminal standpoint, when you're looking at eyewitness testimony, if everyone looks like they say the story exactly the same way, that's when you're trained to look and say, oh, these people have actually fabricated this story. They've got.
No, I get that.
Yeah.
No, I understand that.
It actually adds credibility in both of those things. And neither of us can really speak to and say which is true. I mean, you bring up a good point. I'm not saying you're not right. You couldn't be right. But what I'm saying is that you also could be wrong for the same reasons that you think that you're right.
Well, I can't be wrong about one version of the story being wrong. If you have competing ideas and people saying different things, one of them is necessarily wrong. Again, either the woman told the disciples or they didn't. That's just a binary, right? So that means that one version of those stories is wrong.
Or it's their perspective of when they were talking about when did we talk to someone and tell them the story. You know, if I were to say, hey, did I tell the story right away to someone? I might say no if I didn't go to them right away to talk to them about it. I might say I didn't.
Are you suggesting that when the gospel says that, I think it's the Gospel of John, says that Mary Magdalene didn't tell the other disciples, are you suggesting that she actually did tell them, just at a different moment?
I'm saying I don't know. I'm saying that there are pretty practical explanations for why there may be different perspectives on different stories, and we wouldn't draw a conclusion. We would follow up with more questions if we had those witnesses that we could speak to. The fact of the matter is we don't have those witnesses that we can speak to get them to clarify their stories, and so you're left in a position just like we are with, Julius Caesar crossing the Rubicon, or Alexander the Great conquering the entire world, known world at the time. We don't have people that we can go back and check those facts on. So we're left in a position where we look at the culmination of the evidence that we do have.
Yeah, but I would say that I don't think that those are fair analogies, because those are not claimed to be supernatural events. A resurrection is a supernatural event. Someone crossing a river is not supernatural.
What would you be looking for if you were looking for evidence historically of a supernatural event taking place?
Well, one, we would have to confirm that the supernatural is possible, and nobody can seem to do that. Even if we can't explain the physics or the mechanism behind the supernatural, we can't even verify that anything supernatural has ever happened or that the supernatural is real. This is what I said earlier about the circularity of the argument. In order to believe in the resurrection, you have to believe in the supernatural. But one evidence of the supernatural that people point to is the fact that Jesus resurrected. But that's a circle. That's like circular reasoning. I don't have a reason to believe in either one.
Other than the reaction of the people at the time who actually were eyewitnesses to the events.
Again, I don't know that there were eyewitnesses because we don't have eyewitness testimony. And number two, even if there were eyewitnesses to something, the fact that people see something and believe it to be supernatural doesn't prove that it is. Like, that's not enough to validate the supernatural.
Well, the claim was that Jesus was walking amongst them. And what you had was an explosion of people believing that Christ had risen from the dead. Again, I'm not there, so I can't ask. I can't do anything other than look at the reaction of the people at the time. And again, recognizing that they are in a time where all of their religious authorities are telling them that this is not the case, and are coming up with other reasons why there's an empty tomb, and the people aren't believing it. Why? You have to ask the question, why aren't they believing it?
By the way, this was soda. This was not beer. So I just didn't want you to think I was drinking alcohol on stream. But,
no worries.
How much time do we have, moderator?
We are currently I'm trying to do math in my head. 17 and a half minutes left.
For this section?
For this open discussion, yes.
Okay.
It goes both ways. It's both of you together. So
yeah, you can ask me questions also, Greg. I feel like I'm the being more interactive.
I guess I'm not asking a lot of questions because at the end of the day, I only have the points that I've made, and okay. At that point, there's, I mean, what are we going to go to? I mean, in truth, what we're left with is either I look at those things that I've talked about and you believe them, or choose to believe them, or you are convinced by them, or you're not convinced by them. And if you're not convinced by them, then you're taking a step of faith or making a choice of belief that you don't believe that Jesus rose from the dead. And I can only point to what I can point to and say that's enough for me to believe. And with other things going on that add to my belief in the Christian faith. So I don't know that we come to an absolute certainty conclusion. You're gonna either believe based on what you're convinced of, and I'm going to believe based on what I'm convinced of.
Would it be fair for me to say that the primary reason you're convinced that this is true is because the Bible says so? Is the Bible the primary reason you believe that the stories contained within are true?
I don't necessarily think that. I mean, I think what I gain from the Bible is the claims. I don't think the Bible gives evidence.
Okay, well, the reason
Bible makes the claim, and then we have to look at stuff that's outside of the Bible.
Yeah. And so the reason I asked that question is because one of the pieces of evidence I think that you were appealing to just now was the empty tomb, and why so many people said there were eyewitnesses to an empty tomb and all of that, right?
Well, that's what the Jewish religious leaders claimed, and not just in the Bible. That's what the religious leaders claimed. They claimed that either the body was stolen, or that maybe he swooned, or
Where did they claim that?
My understanding, and I'm not an expert in this area, so let me say that, is those are well-known claims of the Sanhedrin and of the religious leaders of the time. So
you believed what's written in the Sanhedrin?
Well, the Sanhedrin's a body, so it's not like a writing. It's in the Jewish.
I know.
Right. Okay.
It's like the Bible is a collection. It's not.
It's a collection, right? Yeah. So what I believe would be the testimonies of the religious writers of the time, the members of the Sanhedrin.
What about the parts of the Sanhedrin that contradict the Bible? Because in the Sanhedrin, they recorded that the Jews stoned Jesus to death. He wasn't crucified in the Sanhedrin. The Romans claimed, or I should say the Bible authors claimed that he was crucified, but that's not what the Jewish leaders who wrote in the Sanhedrin said about his death.
Right. So the question then becomes, do you believe the Romans or do you believe the Jewish religious leaders?
Well, that's my point, though. You're pointing to the Jewish religious leaders when it comes to they believe that the body was stolen. But why would you?
My point on that is they recognize that there was an empty tomb.
I don't know that they
recognize that Jesus died.
I don't know that. Well, yeah, but here's the thing. They also said that they stoned him, right? Which means that if they stoned him, there could have been a tomb because they may have entombed him after they stoned him. But there's no reason to believe that the Romans would have entombed him or allowed for him to be entombed.
So
you're going with the Roman account of the crucifixion and saying that's credible. And then you're going with the Jewish account of the tomb and saying that's credible. Well, does that not seem contradictory? Because they have different contradictory accounts of what happened.
So both of them would account for the fact that Jesus was dead, right?
Yes, but not resurrected and not even entombed.
Okay.
Christianity needs all of those things to be true. Christianity needs him to have been executed, to have been entombed and resurrected. And so from a Christian perspective, I understand why you want to take from this part of the story that says he was crucified and not stoned, and then take from this part of the story that says he was entombed and not hung up.
I'll be honest with you. I was unaware that the writing said that he was stoned. So for me to speak to that, it would be out of turn.
Okay.
I would have to go back and look at that. But I from a practical standpoint, if the claim of Christianity was that he had been crucified and that he had risen from the dead, then it would make all the sense in the world for the Jewish writings to say that he had died in some other manner, because it's just another explanation. But again, so how did the people react? They didn't react by going, it doesn't appear that they reacted by saying, oh, the Christian version is wrong. The version that's being told by the followers of Christ at this time is wrong. They seem to have responded to the one that said that he was crucified. And because they joined and started following the Christian faith. They didn't stop and say, I'm going to maintain my following of my Jewish heritage. They walked away from it. So that would lead me to think that those that were there that actually were making a decision about which one was the right call, they made the call that the Roman version was right.
Okay. I think that we probably have a fundamental disagreement about when Christianity exploded and how it exploded. Because I think that you're thinking that Christianity became widespread right after Jesus died. But I don't know that the evidence, I know that that's what the Bible suggests. I know that that's what Paul suggests. I don't know that that was actually the case in history, though. My understanding is that it became widespread and then really started to take over when Constantine adopted it.
That would certainly be true of it worldwide, but what I'm speaking to is just what happened in Jerusalem. And that's what my understanding of the writings, not just the Bible, speak to, is that in Jerusalem there was an explosion of those that were most close in proximity to the actual events.
Okay, and I would
that would be the ones that I would be looking to, is to see how they reacted, not the ones that in Ephesus and Yeah,
well, we don't know how they reacted because they didn't write anything or tell us how they reacted. We only know what Paul and Peter say. Really, Paul, because Peter probably didn't write Peter, unless you think he did. But that's a different subject. We have the writings in the Bible which say there was an explosion of Christianity, and that's really all we have. But I don't think that the Bible is reliable because of, how do you choose which parts of the Bible, if it has contradictions or errors in it, how much of it has to be wrong for you to say this is not reliable? If you could put a percent on it.
I guess I don't see the glaring contradictions that aren't pretty easily explained in most cases. Yet, like if you say, hey, we have a testimony of the women, the women saw it, they didn't tell anyone, they told a few people, or they told just one person. Well, those are very easily just based on timeline. Which when the person is writing, what perspective are they talking about from the timeline? If you're talking about, hey, when the women first left, did they go tell no one? Well, maybe they went off, and that person was writing from the perspective of, for the first 3 hours, they didn't tell anyone to anyone. And then they went to one person and told that one person, and that was the perspective of another writer. And then it came to telling others beyond that, and that was the perspective of another. Those are all easily explained by what's the timeline.
Do you think that there are any errors or contradictions in the Bible, not just related to the resurrection account, but just anywhere?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that there are places where it speaks of the number of chariots that were used and number of horses that were in a person's army, and we're talking about tens of thousands in difference. Is it possible that there are some kind of right where someone inscribing something didn't write down the right number of zeros? Maybe. I wouldn't argue against that point. That would be a clear contradiction. But I think there's an explanation for that, and I don't think that has anything to do with the theology of what they were testifying to.
Can I ask you one that's theologically impacting?
Yeah,
I'm curious as to your take on this.
Yeah.
Because I don't think that Jesus fulfilled, I don't think he fulfilled messianic prophecy, but I think he failed even his own predictions. So in Mark 13, this is where Jesus is discussing the end times with his disciples and his second coming, right?
Okay.
There's a verse in Mark 13 where he says, truly I tell you, this generation will certainly not pass away until all of these things have happened. And he gives all of the signs of the end times. But that generation passed away. Wouldn't that suggest that what he said is not true?
He said that there are some that are among us that will not pass, right?
Well, that's a different passage. He says that too in a different place. He says in Matthew 16, for the Son of Man is going to come in his Father's glory with his angels and then reward each person according to what they have done. Truly, I tell you, some who are standing here will not taste death before they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. Right. They're all dead. They all tasted death.
Right.
So
I understand. And I would say that just from the generation not passing there, I have to ask, what things are we talking about? Is he talking about the fullness of the testimony that is given? Because in a biblical stance, it's understood that many prophecies are given, and there's things that are short-term prophecies, there are long-term elements to it, midterm elements to it, and long-term elements to certain prophecies. It may be that he's talking about the elements that are just those that are short-term. They would not pass away until they saw those components. And part of that could have been the testimony about what was going to happen and transpire with regards to the tearing down of the temple. And that certainly did happen in the presence of those people that were there. They saw the temple get destroyed by Rome.
I'm just going to read this quick excerpt. I know I'm short on time, but I just want to read this quick excerpt from Mark 13, just so that you can have more of a context.
Yeah.
Starting in verse 23, Jesus says, be on your guard. I've told you everything ahead of time, but in those days, referring to end times, following that distress, the sun will be darkened and the moon will not give its light. The moon doesn't have light, but I digress. The stars will fall from the sky and the heavenly bodies will be shaken. He's quoting from the Old Testament. Right. At that time, people will see the Son of Man coming in the clouds with great power and glory, and he will send his angels and gather the elect from the four winds, from the ends of the earth to the ends of heaven. Now, this is the lesson from the fig tree. As soon as the twigs get tender and the leaves come out, you know that summer is near. Even so, when you see these things happening, you know it is near, right at the door. Truly, I tell you, this generation will certainly not pass away until all of these things have happened. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will never pass away. So it doesn't seem like he's talking about part of it. It sounds like he's talking about everything he just said until all of these things happen. I'm going to let you respond to that if you want. If we're short on time, we can move on. But I think that I don't see how that story is true. That seems like a failed prediction because all of those things, none of those things happened, and they all died. So it seems like a complete failure to me. That generation is dead.
I guess what I would say, just in light of what we're talking about right now, is that I think that's a larger debate and something else that we probably should cover on another time.
That's fair.
Because probably I just being honest, I would want to go dig down and look at that myself more.
That's fair. I only brought that up because I think that, to me, that's a reason why I don't trust what's written in the Bible. It says things that are not only untrue, like scientifically or historically, but it doesn't even get some of its own things right. When it says something's going to happen and then it doesn't happen, or the opposite happens, now I don't believe anything it says, you know?
Right. All I would say is I know I'm not an expert on those verses. So and there's been a lot of people that have written a lot of things about different ways that those would be, that would be interpreted. I'm not your guy to ask about that, but I would probably venture to say you're probably not the guy either.
Fair enough. What's our time, moderator?
Currently, little over 3 minutes left.
Okay, so there's time for one more question then. Revelation 13. We talked about this a little bit offline, I think in another conversation, but I want to bring it up here since I have the time. Revelation 13 talks about the beast, right?
Yes.
The beast is a symbolic representation of the Antichrist. I think we both agree that the beast is a reference to Caesar Nero, at least in its original context.
I don't know that we agree on that. I think that that's one interpretation that is plausible, but I also don't think that it's necessarily is speaking of him. And again, recognizing the way the Bible speaks about things from a prophetic standpoint and talking about things, it is not uncommon for there to be a mention of a historical figure in the near term, and then stating that is like unto someone who would be coming in the future.
No, I get that. I'm talking about in the original context, the historical context. It's pointing to Nero, right? It says the mark of the beast is number. It says his number is 666, which in the gematria spells Caesar Nero.
Well, I mean, that is it coincidence that his name is 666? Potentially, could it be? That's a reason to believe that it is him, but we don't have the writer of the book of Revelation saying, hey, and you should take this 666 as coming from the way things are written in the Greek. I mean, I'm sorry, in the Greek, or how it was written in Latin.
Well, but the problem there is that he does both, because there's one manuscript that has the Latin spelling, which is 616, and it's the same point. That's
right,
the same,
but we don't have him coming out and saying that this applies to Nero, that this is going to be a Roman leader. That is a plausible reference that could be made from that, but we don't actually have him coming out and saying Nero.
Do you believe that it makes sense, given the fact that Nero was persecuting Christians at the time, that he was talking about Nero?
I think it makes perfect sense for someone to look at it and say, gosh, he sure, if this was going to be an Antichrist, he certainly would look like one.
And I think I'm being corrected that in the Hebrew.
You could make the claim of others and say, hey, there's verses in the Bible that say that whoever the Antichrist is going to be someone that even the elect would be deceived by. And so you could look at anyone that Christianity is looking and saying, oh, wow, he's saying everything we want him to say, that they would want to follow him. That would be someone that you would look at and say, that would be a plausible person to be the Antichrist. There may be some that would say, oh, wow, Trump is the Antichrist because of that. because he's saying a lot of things that Christians believe and they're wanting to follow him.
If Revelation, if the prophecy is not telling us exactly who it is, then I don't know what good it is as a prophecy. Like, how are we supposed to recognize it? If it could be anyone, then it could be anyone. It's not very useful at that point.
Well,
And
okay.
Okay.
All right. Good 30 minutes there. Okay, gentlemen, we have 5 minutes each for your outros. Greg, we'll start with you. 5 minutes. The clock will start on your first word.
I don't know that I'll take 5 minutes, to be honest with you. Great discussion. I appreciate it, Bryce. I mean, as always, the discussions that we have always tend to be, hey, let me try to learn what the other one's thinking, and gives us a chance to go back and revisit the way what we believe. There are things that you challenge me on, and every time I go back and try to take a peek at it. And as you know, there are things that I have altered my beliefs on, based on some of the things that we talked about at times. I think this is not one of those. I would hope not.
I would hope one debate is not enough to convince you. That would be bad.
It would be very hard for me to be a Christian. In fact, I would say it would be impossible to be a Christian and not believe that Jesus rose from the dead. And if there's a Christian who says that, well, he didn't rise from the dead, it would be very difficult to stand, I think, on that belief. I guess I would circle back to the point I just said, though. This is a belief, and I recognize this is not a no. And I understand that there are arguments that are valid to question. And I understand why people who don't believe in Christianity raise the arguments they do. The only question that I would raise is, if you look at the culmination of all of the different things that are transpiring there, one, is it practical to believe, or rational or reasonable for someone to say, hey, yes, I recognize this would have to be a miracle, because certainly someone rising from the dead would be a miraculous event. But when you look at the reaction of the people of the time in Jerusalem, under the type of pressure that they were under, and the types of people that were giving the evidences that they were, when you look at all of those types of evidences and reasoning together, I, for one, think it's at least reasonable to think that they believed that what transpired was that Jesus rose from the dead. And on the basis of that, and what I know have for reasons of believing Christianity other than that, I choose to believe. I choose to believe it, and I know it's based on what I'm convinced of, and you're convinced otherwise. Ultimately, both of us won't know until we die, and I hate to say that, but I think that's probably where we're both going to end up. And we're going to choose one, either to believe it or not believe it. So that's it. That's all I've got.
All right. Stop that there. Fantastic. Bryce, you got 5 minutes for your closing. First word, we'll start the clock.
All right. Well, I think the empty tomb is often cited by Christians as the best evidence for Jesus's resurrection, but that's not evidence at all. At least it's not for me. That's also part of the claim. And I just don't think that you get to appeal to part of the story to prove the story true. That's not how that works. I don't know that there was an empty tomb. I don't know that there was a tomb at all. A tomb for a convicted criminal who was executed by the state is very inconsistent with Roman crucifixion history. Criminals were usually purposely left up there so that they could rot, and it served as a warning for the public to respect Roman law. So if an empty tomb is the best evidence for Jesus's resurrection, where is this tomb? Where can I find it? How can I examine it? The fact is, there is no tomb. Nobody can tell you where the tomb is, where it was, what happened to it, or if Jesus was ever in it. They can only claim that there was once a tomb, that one day it was full of Jesus, and that another day it was empty. That's just not evidence. One of the reasons I think that the Romans believed that Nero resurrected from the dead is because there were so many imposters coming along claiming to be Nero after he showed up after death. We touched on this earlier. I think most people, including Christians, would say that the best explanation for the resurrection accounts of Nero is that there were imposters impersonating him. Well, I happen to think that that's the best explanation for the resurrection of the Jesus resurrection accounts as well. In fact, the Bible narrative even kind of supports that, although I'm sure that wasn't the intent of the authors. In Mark 13, when Jesus is telling the disciples about end times, in verse 6, he says, "Many will come in my name, claiming that I am he, and will deceive many." It's almost like he was predicting that people would impersonate him after his death. John 20:14 says that Mary sees Jesus at the tomb, but she didn't recognize him. She has a short conversation with him thinking he was the gardener. John 21:4 says early in the morning, Jesus stood up and the disciples didn't recognize him. He has a long conversation with them. None of them recognize him. They all told Jesus about, the crucifixion and the resurrection, not knowing that they were talking about Jesus. How is this possible? Why wouldn't his closest companions, his own disciples, recognize him? The simplest explanation I can think of is that it wasn't Jesus, it was an imposter. Just like the Nero imposters who wanted to keep the mythology going, I think it's at least plausible that Christ had imposters who wanted to keep the mythology going and did exactly that. Many people can be convinced of simple things, especially in that time, but the truth of a claim is in no way bolstered by how many people believe it or how strongly they believe it. People believing something is not good evidence that it happened. And that's the end of my scripted closing. I just want to say, Greg, I appreciate you. And I'm glad that we can have civil conversations like this without it being a dumpster fire. It's why I like talking to you. I'm glad to hear that you say that you've learned stuff and I've challenged you. I have to say that you also keep me on my toes. A lot of times when I think I'm giving a pretty good rebuttal, you hit me with something that throws a monkey wrench in there, and then I have to rethink how I'm going to approach it. Every Christian is different. Not every Christian believes in the same thing in the same way. And so I can't make assumptions with you. And you know what I'm talking about with your unique views on creation and all that. And so you keep me on my toes. But whenever I'm doing this, I try to be as biblical as possible when I'm doing the internal critique part. And I try to be consistent with other belief systems when I'm doing an external critique. And when I do that, I don't see any more weight to Christianity than to any of the other ones. Done. You can take the last minute. I said it all.
Okay. We're good. Excellent. Well, thank you both for all of those. And of course, now we're going to move on to the audience Q&A. If we have questions for any of the interlocutors, either Greg or Bryce here on the stage, be sure you in the live chat tag your questions with @SkepticHaven. That helps us to see them so that we can grab them and we can throw them in the back chat, and I can ask them as they come up. I've got a few already on deck. The first question that comes up, and I think this is for Bryce, but I think it could go for both of you. And we can go with one at a time. How sure are you of the resurrection and Christianity in general, that it's true or that it's false? Both of your answers to that. Like, how certain are you of these?
Well, I don't know how to quantify certainty. To me, certainty is one of those words that's a binary. Either you're certain of something or you're not. Mm-hmm. Not only am I not certain of it, but I'm convinced, as I kind of just alluded to in my closing, that there's good evidence, that there's sufficient enough evidence to conclude that this didn't happen, because there's so many resurrection accounts that were believed at the time. Resurrections were common, a resurrection, again, that would be an extraordinary claim, but resurrection accounts are not extraordinary. And so I think that that's the best explanation for this account until somebody can show me some kind of evidence that a resurrection is even possible, or that the supernatural happens. It doesn't have to be possible naturally, but if somebody can prove to me that the supernatural exists, I don't have a good reason to believe that. I would say that the chance of a resurrection happening are zero, at least according to natural sciences. And because I have zero data points to look at as far as supernatural goes, I would still have to say zero. So I'm 0% sure or 0% certain that a resurrection happened.
Okay.
And I guess I would say, to my understanding, there's only been one resurrection. Well, other than Lazarus, that Jesus raising him from the dead, and perhaps some others that are spoken of, like in terms of him doing something. But of someone rising from the dead themselves, certainly Jesus would be the only one that I would be able to look at and say, hey, here's a claim. And can I say with absolute certainty, like 100%? When I say that I know something, I mean no. In fact, I know with absolute certainty. I don't think there's anything that we know with absolute certainty, and so it would be impossible for any of us to say that we knew with 100% certainty that this transpired. But I also would say that I don't know with 100% certainty a lot of historical things have transpired, and this would be an extraordinary thing. But again, based on what I've shared in terms of the culmination of the evidences of how the people in Jerusalem reacted, and because that's not the only basis for which I believe Christianity, I would say that I feel very certain. I don't know. I mean, I wouldn't put 100% on anything, but I would say that it's enough for me to take the step of faith to say that I choose to believe it, and that I'm convinced of, based on the evidence that I do have, that it's a reasonable step to take. So,
Okay.
not an extraordinary. It's certainly an extraordinary step to believe that someone rose from the dead, but I think there's reason to believe it.
Okay. The second question for Greg. If you were not sure what the extra biblical sources had to say about whether Jesus was laid in a tomb, how did you come to conclude that he was?
If I'm repeat it to me again, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no problem. If you were not sure what the extra biblical sources had to say about whether Jesus was laid in a tomb, how did you come to conclude that he was?
Well, certainly I believe the Bible, for one. But I know that that's not going to be a reasonable writing here. I mean, you have writings of other people that are at least stating that they have gone and spoken to others and examined the evidence themselves. I mean, certainly Josephus and Tacitus and different people wrote about different things where they said that this was something that there was someone named Jesus who rose from the dead. I can only look at it from the standpoint in saying that these were considered to be credible historians of their time, and that they did the work that I can't do. But we believe other historical events based on the writings of people who are considered to be credible in their time. I have no reason to question them per se, especially those that were not Christian themselves. So I guess on that basis is why I would say I believe there was an empty tomb.
Okay. Next question. This is also for Greg. Shouldn't this Jesus have been back by now? When does Greg expect that to happen?
I think the Bible obviously leaves that pretty nebulous from the standpoint of the exact time. In fact, it tells us that even Jesus didn't know when it came time for him to speak with the Father about it. And there'd be good reason why you wouldn't tell exactly what that time was, because you'd have a bunch of people that could live and say, hey, look, I'll just wait until the last moment, and when I see the exact circumstances take place, that's when I will choose to fall in line and ask Christ to be my Savior, per se. If you're looking to have a people who actually are worshiping you as God, you're not looking for them to just fall in line at the last minute. You want them as a matter of choice because they love you and long for the nature of you to say yes to you regardless. And and that you would always live as if the moment could happen tomorrow. And in fact, it wouldn't even be that you would live for that moment. You'd live as if the moment was now, because you love that God that much that you would just do all of it, even if you didn't have any assurance that he was coming back.
And can I piggyback on that question?
Yeah.
Really quick? Because I actually agree with everything that Greg just said about the reason why the specific time is not given. However, I do want to point out that that comes from Matthew 24, where he says, but of the day or hour, no one knows, not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son, but only the Father knows.
Right.
But the verse right before that, actually 2 verses right before that, are the ones that I read earlier, where he says, truly, I tell you, this generation will certainly not pass away until all of these things have happened. That was verse 34 of the same passage. And so what he's saying there is that this is the generation of which his return was. He said of the day and the hour, no one knows, but he already mentioned that it would happen in this generation. And to me, the fact that it didn't happen in that generation seems to suggest that it was supposed to happen and it didn't happen. But I do agree with you that the reason for the no one knows the day nor the hour is because you're supposed to live as though it's happening any day. At least that's what he was telling the disciples at the time.
Right. And I guess what I would say to that, Bryce, is great. That shows me that I need to go study that more so I can give a better answer. Yeah.
Fair.
Yeah.
All right. Next question is, this one I believe is also for Greg. If the tomb story is so important, why didn't Paul mention it, or anyone, until after all the witnesses had passed on, for that matter?
Well, the creed that he cites in 1 Corinthians 15 was something that they were already saying before Paul wrote. So presumably this was a belief that goes back to the earliest days, that Jesus was dead, that he was placed in a tomb, and that he rose again. And so I guess I would just say I think the evidence is that was the early belief, that just because Paul didn't say something about it, the reason why he may not have said anything about it is because it was so common, such a common belief among Christians, there was no reason to necessarily mention it. Any more so than he did within the creed, the citation of the creed.
Okay. Next one, and this one's for Bryce. So they're not forgetting you out there. Question for Bryce. Why did Christianity survive Nero?
Okay, yeah, that's a good question. I would say that part of the reason, maybe one of the biggest reason, is because the teachings of Jesus are attractive to a lot of people, even today. I mean, earlier in the conversation, Greg said, it's something, he takes a step of faith because it's something that he chooses to believe. And I think that there's a lot of people like that today. I was a Christian for over 20 years. I never had any direct revelation. I never had any direct evidence. It was something I was kind of brought up in, but it was also something that I thought was good. I thought they were good teachings. I thought they were moral teachings. I thought it had a positive message. If I put myself back in the day, in those times where life was short, life was harsh, it was painful, you weren't sure if your children were going to survive. You weren't sure if you were going to survive. This guy comes along and he starts talking about resurrection and life after death and hope for the future and treasures in heaven. I mean, that sounds pretty attractive. And that's something that the Jews weren't teaching, by the way. This is fundamentally different from what the traditional Jewish religion was teaching about death. In death, in the Jewish religion, everyone went to Sheol, and that was just the grave. So Jesus comes along and he's talking about this new kingdom, a new heaven and earth. There will be no more pain, suffering, no more tears. People want to believe that. And so you're going to have a lot of people just choosing to believe that. I don't think they're choosing to believe. I think that they are being swept up and caught up in an attractive message, and they can't disprove any of this. I don't want to say they had bad critical thinking skills back then, but they had very limited means of investigating claims. When a bunch of people are saying stuff and, they're all believing it, and it sounds good and it's something that seems good, you're probably going to believe it too, at least if you have no access to any way to validate anything. Children do this all the time. It's kind of how I started off in Christianity. So I think that that's how it survived Nero. It was a relatively positive message compared to the message that was being taught by a lot of the other belief systems, and people wanted to believe in it. Where I think it exploded is when, it became kind of the state religion of Rome, and then they started spreading it by the sword. And then you had crusades, and then you had Inquisition, and then you had witch trials, and then you had colonialism, and then you had manifest destiny. There's a lot of violence involved in the expansion of Christianity as time goes on. But I think initially it was mostly, this is an attractive thing we want to believe in, and we can't disprove it. So therefore it's true until someone convinces us otherwise. Because if it's not true, I have no hope in anything. I'm going to die and everything's going to suck.
Okay. Next question. This is a question for both of you. So whoever wants to go first in this, the question is, if solid evidence showed you that your current position is in error, what would that look like?
Do you want me to go first, Greg?
It's fine. Yeah.
I mean, if it depends on what we're asking about. Solid evidence for what? Are we talking? If we're talking about
evidence, yeah.
Yeah, if we're talking about the resurrection, if someone could validate somehow, I don't know how anyone would do this, but if they could find that any body had died and was dead, medically dead for 2 or 3 days, and that someone prayed for them in the name of Jesus or in the name of whatever, and that person came back to life, that would be pretty compelling for me to believe that clearly that's a resurrection happening. And if a resurrection can happen now, maybe a resurrection happened before. And if they prayed in the name of Jesus, maybe it was Jesus doing the resurrection. That would probably be compelling. We don't have anything like that. The Bible says, Jesus tells the disciples that faith as small as a mustard seed can move mountains. And he says, he says this after healing a demon-possessed boy. And he's basically telling his disciples, you can do the same things I can do. You can exorcise demons. You can heal people. If this were true, we would expect people to be able to do that today. And yet we never see anything like that. I mean, the Catholic Church claims that they do, exorcisms. I don't know if you believe that, Greg, or not. You're not Catholic, but you believe in exorcism? Okay. Well, they do that.
I believe that there's a lot of people that think that there's a demon possession when in fact it could be schizophrenia or something along those lines. Obviously, I come from a neuroscience background.
Yeah,
so
and
I think we need to be very careful when we throw those terms out. But do I believe in exorcism? Yeah, but I also think you need to tread it very carefully.
I think that
on that path.
I think that we need to validate that the person did not have mental illness,
absolutely,
and that it wasn't schizophrenia, and that it wasn't bipolar 2, and that it wasn't schizoaffective disorder, and all these things that people probably had back then that they attributed to demons. If we could say, yeah, it definitely wasn't that, he's healed now, that might be convincing. If we could see people doing, healing amputees, that never happens. I'm not aware of that ever happening, but according to Christ, people who do this in his name should be able to do these things. I think that if we saw stuff like that, that would probably convince me that, okay, the message of Christ is true. He told the truth. People did these things. They worked. Prayer works. It's because I don't see any evidence of the thing that the Bible says I should be looking for. And I don't see evidence of.
Hey, Bryce, can I ask you this? How much have you dug into miracles or anything along those lines? Have you spent much time studying that?
I mean, I've looked up basic claims like amputees, and I see the evidence that I see of people healing amputees or lame limbs usually turn out to be hoaxes on YouTube or done by pastors in Nigeria and but no, I don't see anything that's scientifically validated that any of these miracles have happened.
Okay.
I
haven't studied it in depth myself either. I know that Lee Strobel has looked into a lot of different things along those lines. I believe it's Strobel. Might be worthwhile. I know that there's There's some facility, and I can't remember where it is in Europe, where the Catholic Church has contained a lot of what they do in terms of research around claims of miracles. It might be interesting to look into that and see what you think about what they claim. And in fact, what you'd be interested to know is that most of the things they rule out as being miracles. The vast majority of things that are claimed to be miracles, they would say are not miracles. And so it'd be interesting to see, for you to look at what they actually say is a miracle.
I would have no problem doing that, but I said this a few minutes ago. I'll say it again. I always start with the Bible. This is particularly important when I was a Christian. I started with, what does the Bible say? If the Bible is true, and if this, then that, then that's what I should see in real life. And just when I applied it to my own life and tested its claims about prayer, miracles, they didn't work, and so I can go look at see what the science says and see that it debunks most of them and that maybe some of them. But if it doesn't work when I try it, it doesn't work, So that's what I'm going to conclude as a Christian. So
I get you.
All right. And next question is, this may go for both of you. How does one believe in Christianity, but not every other religion that exists, when the level of evidence is sufficiently equal?
Well, that's easy. I'm going to let Greg answer because he's the Christian here, but I'm a former Christian, and I can just say, when I was a Christian, I was not convinced that the level of evidence for all of them was equal. To be fair, I had only really investigated Christianity. I didn't start meeting people of other religions until I joined the military, so I was already an adult by then. And it was partially my exposure to other religious beliefs and religious claims, and even different denominations of Christianity, that made me kind of question and dig a little bit deeper. But for the most part, I would say the average Christian is not doing the level of research necessary to validate other religions. In fact, it might even be considered threatening to your own faith to even investigate other religions. The Bible says, be careful that people don't take you captive with other philosophies, and so for me as a Christian, I don't want to say I was scared to look into Islam. What I knew about Islam was people flying planes into the Twin Towers and, what they did in the Middle East. I was kind of ignorant, I've learned more about it since then as I've deconstructed. But at the time, my belief was Christianity is morally superior. It's the biggest religion. A lot of fallacious reasoning, but that was enough for me to conclude that Christianity is true. All this other nonsense is not true. And by the way, my version of Christianity, not Catholicism, not, Presbyterian. It was whatever denomination I was. So,
no, I guess what I would say, in part, I would say I agree with you from the standpoint of I don't believe that the evidence is equal for them. Again, we mentioned this earlier. You've got, with Islam, you've got one man who's sitting and basically writes what an angel tells him. I have no way to look at that and say, hey, do I think that there's anyone that could have called him on that? No, but I think with Christianity, along the lines, there have been many that could have called Christian writings out. And does that mean there haven't been challenges to people that have written that were the writers of Christianity? Absolutely. But as many as have challenged it, many have walked away based on their looks into those writings. And again, I'm not an expert in this area, but that many who have dug down and tried to disprove it have walked away having become Christian because of that. I would say go talk to those people. Don't talk to me about that. I would say, though, in the case of Islam, again, you've got Muhammad. In the case of Mormonism, you've got Joseph Smith. Even Joseph Smith, his wife had the golden plates and presented those to the museum, in one of the museums in New York. ancient Egyptologists read and looked and said, what are these golden plates? He claimed that they were certain writings, and they turned out to just be Egyptian Book of the Dead. I mean, so I can look at those. You've got Charles Hayes Russell, as Jehovah's Witness. I mean, he basically is one person that was going around and saying things. You don't have that with Christianity. If you look at the writings in Christianity and the claims that are there, even historical things that people have questioned in the past about it. Hey, what happened with the city of Tyre and the prophecies against it? Oh, it can't happen. The way that a battle took place, it didn't take place the way it says specifically. Oh, wait a minute. What you actually learn later is that there were 2 times in which the city of Tyre fell. And if you put those 2 together, the writings actually support the early destruction of the portion of the city of Tyre that was on the land, and then later was the portion that was on the island. I mean, I could go on and on. There's a lot of reasons why I think that you can believe more in Christianity than in other beliefs. So
can
anyway.
I just say to piggyback on that really quickly? I have a Book of Mormon here.
Yeah.
I have every kind of religious text behind me. But another reason why I didn't believe in the Book of Mormon, that is one religion I did investigate when I was a Christian, because I had Mormon missionaries come knock on my door. And so I would say I'm probably a little bit more familiar with at least some of those claims. All it took for me to investigate was reading the Book of Mormon. Have you ever read the Book of Mormon, Greg?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so you're aware that having dark skin is a curse,
Yes.
and having white skin is a blessing, right?
Yes.
That's all I needed to know that this book is
Until 1970 something, and then
until
it changed. There's a musical about that, I think.
1978 is when it became okay to be black in Mormonism.
Exactly.
So that was all I needed to know.
Come on, Mormonism is all about paradise plus 1 or paradise plus 2. That's what it's all about. So,
yeah.
All right.
There's a big problem with Mormonism. I don't know if you guys noticed, but I'm actually black, and this book tells me that I'm cursed. So
That's right.
It's not true.
So for this next question, this is a big one. This is an important one for Bryce. If Bryce isn't drinking some exotic IPA, what exactly is he drinking?
Bryce is drinking Reed's Zero Sugar Ginger Beer, which has 0 alcohol as well. I don't know.
Considered an endorsement?
No, I'm not. Yeah, I'm not trying to. No brands. This is a non-alcoholic ginger soda with 0 sugar.
Money. No.
So, sorry. However, full disclosure, I did have a shot of Tito's vodka before to calm my nerves. This is actually the first moderated debate I've ever done before, so I was a little bit nervous to come.
Me too.
So, I needed to de-stress a little bit. I'm fine now, and now it's just the soda.
Tito's, the drink of Texas. So next question. It's a popular vodka out of Texas. So next question we have, and this is going to be for both of y'all. So whoever wants to go first, I'll leave it up to you. What would change your mind?
Evidence. Go ahead, Greg. I'll let you go.
I would say evidence too. I mean, if it could be demonstrated that there was no Jesus that rose from the dead. I mean, and there, I would say, yeah, no, I would back away from it. I would say, I think that would be the main one. I mean, they would have to prove that to me. And again, I think we're both in the same boat. Is that it's really hard to prove something that's a historical event, one way or the other. So I think we're going to both be left in a faith boat.
I think for me, I've already kind of answered this when I, talked about why I don't believe in resurrection accounts, but more generally, what would change my mind toward any other aspects of this religion or any other religion? I'm coming from the perspective of someone who has had their mind changed. I used to believe a lot of this stuff and now I don't. And one of the reasons I don't now is mostly from reading the Bible. Back in my apologist days, I spent a lot of time arguing with atheists and people of other faiths about whether the Bible was true. And I was, I don't want to say that they like deconverted me, but when you're doing apologist type stuff, you really need to know your Bible. And I realized I didn't know the Bible enough to be equipped to be able to defend some of my beliefs. I needed to dig into it a little bit more to find out, well, what does the Bible say about the age of the earth? What does it say about a global flood? What does it say about the shape of the earth? What does it say about all this scientific stuff? What does it say about morality? Is all of these things that I was prepared to have arguments for, I had to dig deeper. And every time I tried to find an answer, it raised two more questions. And then I found that I was spending most of my time figuring out ways to resolve the questions and resolve the contradictions. But then I realized that's not how critical thinking works. That's not how skepticism works. That's not how I would treat any other religion. Why am I doing with this? Am I just believing this because I want it to be true? And then once I realized I was doing that, it kind of started to fall apart. And then I started reading the Bible with a more critical viewpoint and figuring out if this is actually true. Can this be corroborated? Where did the Bible come from? Who decided what was canon and what wasn't? Is it salvation by faith alone, or is it faith and works? Or is it only works, or is it none of the above? The Bible can be used to support all of those contradictory positions. And this was a huge stumbling block for me. And so my mind was changed mostly by reading the Bible and finding that it didn't have good answers, and that it was unreliable, seeing like a lot of contradictions and stuff.
Which is fascinating to me, because I kind of come down on the other side of that scale, and would say by reading the Bible is where I came to my confidence in what I believe. I would say there are times where, and Bryce knows this because we know each other and we've spoken a lot, I don't always agree with the way certain people have looked at and what they've said the Bible is actually saying. And so I think interpretation does come into play, and that could be called into question, and someone saying, hey, wait, but you could interpret it any way you want to, etc. I get that argument. But I actually have concluded that a lot of the places where you would say there's a contradiction, there is a rational explanation, and something that's quite reasonable, and in fact would probably be backed by science. And it's not always the early claim, but I think it's the claims that can be made in areas such as creation can be fully backed by science and scripture. So
cool. You mentioned science. One of my favorite is the stopping the sun in the sky, because if the person who wrote that actually understood why the sun moves, that would entail stopping the rotation of the earth, which would be absolutely insane. So it's one of the ones that strikes for me.
And I think,
next question.
Sometimes we forget that these guys, the people that were writing this, yes, they were inspired by God, but they're also writing from their human intuition about things. And we can go back and look and say, hey, he's probably not talking about the earth. The earth didn't stop on its rotation per se. There may have been something else that was transpiring, whether it was some kind of an eclipse type of situation or something along those lines that may have transpired that gave the appearance of what it was. But that would have been the best explanation that person was given their human knowledge at the time.
I think the Bible says the earth is flat, though.
I think it says it's spherical, actually.
It doesn't. It says Isaiah 44 says that there's that it's he refers to the circle of the earth.
The circle of the earth. Right.
Yeah, but that circle is not a sphere. A circle's two-dimensional. A sphere is three-dimensional. There is a word in Hebrew for ball.
Yeah, I think
there's two words.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. There's a difference between those two words.
Yeah.
No, I completely understand, again, but recognizing that this person was not saying that the earth was necessarily flat. He was explaining what he understood it to be. For all I know, what he was trying to express in his best way of explaining it was that this thing was round.
I think that when Satan tempts Jesus in the wilderness and they go on top of a mountain and he shows them all the kingdoms of the world, I think that that's only possible if you're envisioning a flat earth. If they knew that the earth was round, you wouldn't be able to
talking about all the lands that you can see as far as the eye can perceive. And he's talking
that doesn't say that though. That's like
he looks out at all the nations of the earth, right? And,
yeah.
All
the nations of the earth.
I think he's showing him everything that he could see. You could say the same thing of Noah and looking out and seeing the waters covering the entire face of the land or the earth. Is it talking about the entire earth, or is in the Hebrew what it's talking about is the same word means land? He could be talking about that in the same sense. I'm looking out and seeing everything that I see. So, and maybe in the case with Jesus, it's everything you can see and everything beyond what you can see. That would be the earth. He doesn't have to see it to understand that it's everything around the earth. So,
all right. This next question, I believe, is for both. Isn't it weird to have a prophet give a prophecy, but then hedge about when it will come to pass?
Well, I don't think that he did. Greg and I probably disagree a little bit on this, maybe. I think that Jesus gave us enough information about what generation, at least, the prophecy would come true. And he was talking to his disciples. He said, some of you will not taste death until all of these things have happened. So at the very least, it would have been in the time period that they were living in. He says he doesn't know the exact day nor hour, but he tells them that because he wants them to be prepared at all times. But he does give a general indication. The kind of the irony of this is, if not even the angels in heaven nor the Son knows, only the Father knows. Well, clearly Jesus didn't really know, because when he said it was going to happen during the time of the disciples, it didn't happen. Greg probably has a different answer though.
No, well, I would have to, I'm not the expert on that particular passage. My best bet is if we were to go and look and see, okay, what does it mean by generation? That there are different ways that the word generation can mean. It can mean, the life cycle of an individual. It could mean the generation from the standpoint of those that would of an era or of a time period that has some other basis, again, that's not based on the age of people. We speak in terms of eras of things that happen. There's in the church, we talk about the church age, and that is the period of the point where Jesus was raptured and went into heaven, and the time period where he would come back. And maybe it's saying that the generations of people who live within this church age would not pass before that happened. And certainly the church age hasn't passed. Again, I don't know. That would be an area I have to go and study more. But my initial thrust would be that if I was to look at that in the original language, it may be that generation may mean something different and could be interpreted in a different way than how we're talking about it here. So, but I don't know that. So I just want to be honest about that.
Okay.
So
next question. This one's for Greg. Does Greg believe that people can actively choose their beliefs, or does he acknowledge that beliefs are merely propositions that people are convinced of?
I think there's a difference between what you're convinced of and what you believe. I believe that you can't choose what you're convinced of, meaning you've looked at evidence, you've weighed all those different things out. I think you can choose to believe something different. It just means that you're going to choose to do something that may go against, you might choose to believe it against what you would say is a greater level of confidence, in which case you would be taking a larger step of faith. But I think that, and a lot of this comes down to what you say is definitional. I define convinced different than belief. I think that some people, when they say that you can't choose what you believe, they would be using belief in the same way that I would be saying convinced. I don't believe that you can be convinced of something. I think you can choose to believe something. So a person that's jumping out of an airplane can be convinced that the parachute's going to work, but based on what they believe are convinced of about parachutes and how physics works, they take the step. The step of actually jumping out of the airplane is when you've moved to belief. I have made what I'm convinced of something that I act upon. And that when I act upon it, I have acted in belief. So
for you, belief means the action that accompanies being convinced of something?
Probably it has more to do with what you act upon based on what you're convinced of. Because we're all convinced of, all of us are convinced about different things. The degree to which we act upon that thing, or the confidence that we have, or the step of faith that we may put in what we're convinced of, is different for different things. And the degree to which you are confident of, and probably the degree to which you want something to be true, dictates the amount of or evidence that would be necessary for you to take that step.
Can I just ask a clarifying question on that? It's
Maybe
really
or
quick.
of the other person.
No, of what you just said. I'm just curious. Do you think it is possible to believe in something that you're not convinced is true? Like, can you choose to believe in something that you haven't been convinced of?
I think you can. I think if you did, it would be you against your confidence, going against what you're confident of. It would mean that you were trusting in something beyond the evidence per se.
Do you think that people should do that?
I think you should give careful consideration before you do it. I mean, if I'm convinced that the parachute is not going to open, and I still jump out of the airplane, then I would be stupid.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good enough.
Yeah. I think you should have at least enough confidence that that you would think it is not irrational to believe in what you're doing. So, which means that I would at least say that I think that the evidence for the resurrection is at least as equal or better than I think is the evidence against it. Yeah.
Okay. Next question. This one's for Bryce. Who is this orange friend sneaking into frame?
This is Sammy. You can't see her right now. Maybe if I turn the camera, you can see her over here. This is Sammy. She is a girl, and I thought she was a boy when I first got her because she's orange, and if a cat is an orange tabby, they have a 75% of chance of, or 80% chance of being male. It's genetic. And so I was like, Sammy the cat. And then we found out as she grew older, she doesn't have the right parts. So she's a girl. So yeah. And she's a fat loaf sitting on my laptop. And there's another one running around here too. His name is TAZ, but I can't say his name out loud. Otherwise he'll run over here and start causing destruction.
Yeah.
And he is named after the Colombian character for a reason.
I want to ask based on that, as an orange cat operating with one brain cell.
She is actually, I would say, of average intelligence. I would have classified her as on the smarter side before I got this other guy here. But he can do things that she can't. And he clearly thinks he's smarter than even me. So now when I'm comparing them to each other, she seems like a more typical cat. She's very loving, very affectionate. She loves people. She's got some questionable opinions about other cats. Yeah. But this guy over here who you can't see, I guess I could show you. Hang on. He's sleeping. Hey, Taz. Taz. Hey, you're on camera. All right. I didn't want anything. He's tired. Yeah. No, he does parkour in the house. He runs up the walls, tries to get to the ceiling. he knows physics more than she does. When they chase each other, he always chooses the shorter route. He leaps over obstacles. She doesn't understand what just happened. So yeah, they clearly they developed along different neurological lines, I should say.
Okay. This next question for both of you. What is a question you wish had been asked?
Tonight?
Hmm?
Gosh, I don't know. A question that I need clarification, like from the audience or from my interlocutor?
It doesn't specify, so I guess we go by interlocutor. So, what is a question you wish you had been asked?
I mean, I don't know that this is not the best example. Greg and I actually know each other. We talk all the time. And this is not the first. We've had many informal debates. And so it's hard to even imagine a question that hasn't already come up that we haven't talked about in some way before. What do you think, Greg?
No, I mean, I can't think of one, to be honest with you.
Not one like off the top of my head. Maybe, sometimes when I'm reading a Bible or if I'm watching a live stream that someone else is doing, like if I'm watching The Line or DZ Debates or some of these other people, and I hear something for the first time, I'm often curious what Greg might think of it. It's usually something coming from another Christian, a claim about why they believe this part of the Bible. And I'm often, wondering what you would say to that. But as far as questions that you would have for me, I mean, I'm kind of an open book. I think you've been too. How long have we known each other?
It's gone probably 7 or 8 years.
Yeah, I feel like it's around 2019 or something like that, maybe 2020.
Been a while.
So yeah, I don't know that there's a question that I wish.
I guess I would say I would answer it differently from the standpoint of I don't know if there's another question I would wish was asked. I will say I'm glad that there was a question asked. I like the question that you've asked me with regards to this generation passing. Because and Bryce knows this about me. I'm not trying to defend my beliefs so much as I really do want to know the truth. And so in our conversations, there are many times when he's asked me questions and I don't know the answers and I haven't really given it enough thought to feel adequate in giving a response. And so I love when Bryce asks me those kinds of questions, because quite frankly, if whatever I'm believing can't stand up to scrutiny, then it's not truth, and I don't want to be standing on it. Ultimately, I do want to stand on the truth, and I think Bryce would say the same thing. If I could say something to him that demonstrated to him in a way that convinced him that the Bible was true and Christ was true and all those things, I really believe about Bryce that he would say, I will change then. Because I think Bryce is searching for truth. He's not just trying to defend his own belief system. And I think there are sometimes when there are debates, when the people are more interested in defending what they believe than they are about really discovering truth. And I think you can tell the difference sometimes when you see those kinds of debates.
Hey, Greg, do you got a pen and paper on you?
Yeah.
Take down these Bible verses for just to kind of point you in the right direction. You said you wanted to investigate this.
You bet.
Mark 13, verses 23 to 31. There's a parallel in Matthew 24.
Yes. 27
to 35.
And you've quoted those. I mean, we've mentioned those, I believe.
Yeah. There's another one though.
What in Matthew one? Say the Matthew one again. Yeah.
The one that I just said was Matthew 24, verses 27 to 35. It's basically the same thing. It's talking about this generation. Yeah. The one I want you to cross-reference with those is Matthew 16, verses 27 and 28, because this is a different chapter, and it's basically the same thing. Matthew, Mark, and Luke, all three of the synoptic gospels, they repeat this theme in different places. So it's not just like, you're not just hearing it from the same context all the time. You're hearing him say this over and over. This generation, some of you standing here.
So we should be able to look at that in the original language and gain some context. Again, this may be a great point for us to discuss.
That's one of the reasons I brought that up, because that last verse that I gave you, earlier you said maybe generation can mean something else.
Yeah.
And you're right. It can mean something else in
Yeah.
Greek. It can mean people. It can
Yeah.
mean group. It can mean, it can mean a couple different things. But there's another verse in Matthew 16 where he doesn't say this generation. He says, each of you standing here today. And so that tells you that tells you who he's talking about, And so that's why I'm like, don't just look at one verse. Look at all the different verses that say,
I know what would be interesting there is to see who his audience was. And one thought that I have that crosses my mind, and again, I haven't given this a great deal of thought, is the thought about Melchizedek as an individual. And that's a completely different discussion. It says that he has no father or mother. He has no gender. It sounds as if this is a created individual, and yet here he is living at the time of Abraham. Are there people that are at that time that maybe have survived? I don't know, but it will be an interesting thing for me to look at, and so I will take a peek at it.
Is it Melchizedek or Melchizedek? I always said Melchizedek, but
it's spelled CH, but I think it's pronounced Melchizedek. But I think that tomato, we know who we're talking about.
Fair enough.
I think along the same lines as Nebuchadnezzar, because that's a CH as well. So
yeah.
Okay. So I was wrong. See, you guys just taught me something. I've been saying Melchizedek wrong the whole time.
Unless you want to say he was Nebuchadnezzar.
No, that sounds dumb.
Because he was I'm sorry, that was dumb. That was dumb. Anyway, next question. For Greg.
Yes.
If it was shown that the God you believe in, as you define it, doesn't exist, would that be sufficient to reject the theology?
If you can show me that it doesn't exist, yeah.
I don't know how you prove a negative, though, right? And so
I agree. I mean, that's the hard part of it. You can tell me, you can tell me that, but it's going to be hard to do.
Yeah, I would say a couple things here, and I need to caution like atheists and skeptics about this. There's a difference between the God of philosophy or the classical theist model of God and the biblical God.
That's right.
When people are talking about God, they're talking about like the broader theological God idea, which is filled with a lot of unfalsifiable claims, invisible, intangible, timeless, spaceless, immaterial. You can't test for any of those things. It's functionally indistinguishable from that which doesn't exist. And so if we're talking about that God, I would say that you can't prove that something that doesn't manifest doesn't exist. When it comes to the biblical God, you can test claims because the Bible God, again, is not the same as the God of classical philosophy. The Bible God does manifest in the Bible. He shows himself. People see him. He does things. He has certain personality traits. These things can be tested for better. And so what you would have to do is, what I do is I look at what the Bible says about God, what it claims about him in terms of his character. And then I look at the actions of God as presented in the book. And then I compare whether they match up. And for me, they don't. And this is one reason why I don't think the biblical God is true, because there are things that the Bible says about God that don't match the actions of God as recorded in the Bible. And so if the thing contradicts itself, contradictions can't exist. And so that's why I'm convinced that the Bible God is fiction. The same thing.
I would say that I believe that certain people's interpretations of the Bible God are fiction. And I think that the Bible God, as he presented himself, at least as I understand him, and again, this is my interpretation. I feel confident in that. I don't always feel confident in everyone else's, but that does, again, it's what I believe, and I can't prove it as an absolute certainty. Unfortunately, we may end up none of us knowing for absolute certain until we get there.
I'll just give one quick example of what I'm talking about when I say that they don't match up. And it has to do with 1 John says God is love. Parts of the Old Testament says God is a God of justice. God is good. Jesus says, why call me good? Only God is truly good. So we know that the Bible claims that God is good, just, and loving. However, we also have a description of what love is from Paul. I think it's 1 Corinthians where he says,
chapter 13, I think.
Yeah, he says love is kind, love is patient, it does not boast, it keeps no record of wrongs. Well, that's a problem for me because Revelation 20 clearly has a book of the dead where people are judged according to their deeds. So if God doesn't keep a record of, if God is keeping a record of wrongs, then he doesn't match even the biblical description of love. So, it's those type of theological contradictions that for me served as evidence that there's a problem with this claim. That's just one. There's a lot of other things mentioned in that passage about what is love. I don't think God fits the criteria, even according to the Bible. When we look at his actions,
the one that I heard was God is love, love is not jealous, which is 1 Corinthians, and then I am a jealous God out of Exodus.
Yeah, it's like
I'm interpreting that as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
So. Yeah, because what is he? Is he jealous of you, or is he jealous for you? I mean, there's a context there that's more that he's jealous for you, unto you wanting you to experience what it is to experience his love, and knowing that you're not experiencing it, and he's longing for it for you. He's jealous of it. He is longing for it more than you are longing for it. Is a way that word could be interpreted in that sense. So
okay,
yeah, that he longs for it more than you do. Yeah. And
the last question we have, and this is a question of clarification for both of you, and I think I'll try and simplify this a bit. So, what do each of you specifically mean by supernatural?
I'll let Greg go first here because my answer is complicated.
I mean, anything that's natural would be anything that would be observable, measurable, falsifiable, all those different things. I mean, it's all the stuff that science is geared towards, is empirical evidence and all of those kinds of things. Supernatural would be something that exceeds that. That would not be falsifiable. It would not be something that is per se natural. I mean, I hate to say it that way, but that's kind of what it is from my standpoint. I don't know about you, Bryce.
Okay, so my answer is this. If I put my Christian hat on, I would probably give a very similar answer to Greg. And when I approach theology from like an internal critique, I kind of default to that definition of supernatural, anything that's like miraculous or divine power. Magic would be an example of the supernatural, demonic arts, anything that is not in accordance with the laws of physics, I would say was supernatural. Now, having said that, as a skeptic and a, deconstructed atheist at this point, I think supernatural is a filler word for something happening that people don't understand. And I think that when you look all throughout history, you find it being used this way, being applied towards natural things that people just didn't understand. Lightning at one point was thought to be supernatural. It was Zeus throwing lightning bolts, or Thor being the god of lightning, and then science figured out what lightning was, and all of a sudden it's natural. I happen to be a materialist. I think that I'm a naturalist as well. I think that only natural things exist. If it's existing, it has a nature. If it has no nature, then it has no ontology, then it doesn't exist. So to me, supernatural is a word that doesn't really make sense. It doesn't really apply to the world. Even if a God existed, it would still have to have its own nature. And so it's still natural. It's still natural in some kind of way. It just may be that we haven't figured it out yet. But yeah, I don't think that supernatural is a thing. I think it's poorly defined for that reason. Historically, it's only ever been referred to, it's only ever pointed to things that were natural, and then science discovers that it's natural, and then it's no longer, you know what I mean? So it's supernatural is just kind of an idea that people have that is like a miraculous thing that doesn't fit with the laws of nature that we know of. But we don't know all the laws of nature, number one.
Yeah.
And I mean, if once we figure out
the totality of what we know is how much.
I mean, we haven't reconciled quantum physics with gravity yet.
As far as what we know, we're probably best to say that we're probably in pre-K4 in terms of
maybe,
what knowledge. Maybe we made a decay.
Or maybe we're on the cusp of graduation. But the point is, we don't know everything yet. We know a lot of the laws of nature, but I don't think we know all of them. And so until we know all of them, there's always going to be things that people say are supernatural if they can't explain them, But once we have an explanation for something and we realize this is actually in accordance with some natural law, then it's not supernatural anymore. So I don't think that there's anything really supernatural. I think that everything has a nature of some kind.
I think the key point there, though, at least from my listening to it, is to say that you do say that I think.
Correct.
Think this, you don't know it. Yeah, and as long as we don't know everything, I think it's important not to come out and say with absolute certainty that something is a certain way or another way.
And by the way, let me say this to some of the Christians who may be watching, who might be just accusing me of believing what I want to believe, because I get that a lot from atheists, I should say, not just Christians. But you're only an atheist because you want to be an atheist. That's not the case. When it comes to the supernatural, I would actually prefer if the supernatural was real. Like, I want there to be supernatural things. I want magic to be real. I want Superman to fly. Like, I would love a world where the supernatural is real and miracle healings happened and stuff like that. That would be better. I just don't think it's true because I've never seen it and no one can demonstrate it.
And from a sympathy standpoint or empathy standpoint or whatever, as a Christian, I think sometimes a lot of people, and maybe it's because the way Christians come across as, they're defending and saying that what I believe is true and you're going to end up going to hell or whatever about that. I can honestly tell you that there's a part of me that says, I hope I'm wrong. If there are atheists or people that don't believe in God and I don't want anyone to go to hell. That's the worst thing ever. I would never want that for anyone. And so there's an aspect of me that sits there and says, is even with the confidence that I have in believing what I believe, there's an aspect of me that says, I hope I'm wrong, because I don't want anyone to ever would go through that. And so anyway, if anyone just thinks that Christians are heartless and just would love to see everyone be proven wrong and that they would face the consequences of that, don't think that. That's not the way most of us believe. I personally, I hope that there is an eternity that I get to spend with Bryce, believe or not believe, because I respect the dude immensely, and I consider him a friend, even though we haven't spent a whole lot of, we've never met each other face to face other than on a Zoom or what have you. So,
Greg, I will say this. I hope that neither one of us ends up in Muslim hell.
Yeah.
You don't believe in Muslim hell, do you?
No.
Okay. Yeah, I don't either. Okay. So we're at least we're good on that.
That's right. But hear the sympathy there from the standpoint of, I think sometimes we get in these debate situations and it's so much, I want to show that I'm right and the other person's wrong, that we forget that there's a lot of things that we're going to disagree on in life. And the question is, how can we live with one another in the midst of that and still care about each other and the well-being of each other in the midst of that? And hopefully that's where we can end up, even if we don't agree philosophically or theologically or any of some of those things. So, yeah. And maybe that's the thing that Bryce and I have crossed that some people haven't crossed yet. Is I think we sincerely care about each other. So, yeah.
I think that the crossover is humanism. I know you identify as a Christian, but your version of Christianity is more what I would say humanistic than many other versions of Christianity. I identify as a secular humanist, and so there's going to be a lot of crossover there. I think a lot of Christians who come to these debates are, like what you said, they're looking to defend something, they're looking to push back, they're apologists, they're not evangelists, and so they're really clinging to something. They're clinging for something to hold on to, and they want it to be true. And, some of them do presuppositional apologists, which is just verbal masturbation. That's not going to convince anybody, but they're not really they're not trying to convince anybody, and so they can be problematic. And then on the other side, I think you have a lot of angry atheists who may have been scorned by religious people. They don't like what religious people do. They think it's, they're advocating horrible things, and they feel some type of way about that, and they kind of lash out. And I think that you get a lot of those two groups butting heads, and it turns into a dumpster fire because neither one of them is really trying to learn from the other. And they both feel like they have nothing to learn from the other, right? So,
yeah.
All right.
Good.
Well, I want to thank you both for a fantastic debate and discussion. I think this was very, very informative. A lot of people could take a lot of things away from this, and I think we came to some logical terminuses on some good points. So, thank you both, Bryce and Greg, for taking the time with us tonight. This was excellent. We also want to put out a giant thank you to our patrons here. Karen Butcher, Logan Fisher, Amanda McLeod, Ryan, Dan D, The Bible Says What, Sonny Shell, Phil Calderon, Victor and Kelly King. We appreciate you so very, very much. And thank you to all of our YouTube members. Special shout outs to Babs Barrett 07, Skeptical Scott, Infidel 3476, Green Eyed Lady 5580, and Michael Bell 3181. You all rock. Thank you for that support. And a huge thank you to the magnificent minds behind all of this. Bree Badger, Cole, Ember, Felicia, Kelly, Lisette, Michael, and Wes. You guys make this happen. So thank you all so very, very much. If you out there are interested in volunteering your time to help here at Skeptic Haven, email them at skeptichaven@gmail.com. There's plenty of work to be done, and we will put you to work. So, but yeah, reach out if you think you can help. And of course, we have a bunch of stuff coming up. Lots of cool things. You see them down here at the bottom where I'm pointing right now. You got Sunday, 7 p.m. You got Let's Talk. Wednesday, 7 p.m. as well. We have Life After Faith. Thursday, 7 p.m. Critical Call. Friday, the Deconversionalists. And Friday at 7, the Thought Experiment. That's Friday at 4, Deconversionalists. Friday at 7, the Thought Experiment. All kinds of stuff going on here all throughout the week. So definitely smash that like button, smash that subscribe button so you'll get notified when those things go live. And be sure to hit that bell so you don't miss any notifications from the channel. All right. And I think this Sunday is Let's Talk with AJ and Godless Engineer. That'll be Sunday at 7 p.m. So that's what's next up on Skeptic Haven. Once again, thank you, everybody. Thank you, guys. Appreciate you. You guys rule. And we will see you all on the next one.
Thanks for watching The Thought Experiment, the arena where religion, politics, and philosophy step into the ring and ideas get tested. Here, we don't dodge the hard questions. We confront them. We weigh arguments, challenge assumptions, and follow the evidence wherever it leads. If you enjoy sharp thinking and honest debate, you're in the right place. Like the video if you found it thought-provoking, subscribe so you never miss a debate. And most importantly, tell us in the comments who won tonight. We read them, we feature them, and sometimes they shape the next episode. Until next time, keep thinking. And we'll see you in the next thought experiment.